Jasmine, representing the newly introduced Steel type in Gen 2. Her ace is Steelix, and we already know that Genesis Steelix is super overpowered, so let's go ahead and get into what this deck is going to be about. As you can see, we got a full playset of Skyridge Pineco here, so you know what Steel type's coming next. It's going to be Fortress, but which one? It's going to be the Discovery Pineco. I love this card just for its stackable spikes ability. Whenever your opponent's bench Pokemon moves into the active position, this Fortress will deal 10 damage to it. So if you have 3 Fortress in play, it's going to take 30 damage just by moving from the bench position into the active spot. Rapid Spin is a decent attack to go with the Pokemon power, but you're mainly going to want these things sitting on the bench just so you can stack damage with that Spike's power. After the 4/4 Fortress line, we're going to be looking at 3 copies of Southern Islands Onyx. This one's mainly used for the 90 HP and the ability to use Slam for 2 of any energy. For those reasons, it's pretty much the standard for any Steelix deck that doesn't want to run fighting type energy. Speaking of Steelix, we are going to be using the Aquapolis Steelix, one of the underrated cards of E-Card. Earth Rift is such a good spread damage attack that fits perfectly with the Discovery Fortress, and if you're using it without the Strength Charm Errata, it's even more powerful. But we respect Errata on this channel most of the time, so we won't be abusing any Strength Charms here. Next we have a Steel type Magnemite from Aquapolis. For 1 metal energy, you can gust out an opponent's Pokemon from the bench into the active position, and for 2 energy, you can deal 20 damage. Not much to see here. Magnemite is a little low on the HP side, so you do have to be careful when you are playing them down. The goal isn't really to attach any metal energy to Magnemite though. You're mainly just wanting to evolve up into Magneton for that Steel Wave attack. For 3 colorless energy, this attack does 10 damage to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon that share the same type as the active Pokemon. This is going to be very destructive in a theme deck format where the Pokemon you're attacking into is almost always going to have the exact same type as every other Pokemon on the bench. So this is a spread damage deck, flat out, hands down. That's what you're going for. If your opponent tries to retreat, the new active's taking chip damage. If you hit your opponent with a Double Gust, they're taking chip damage. When Steelix attacks, spread damage. When Magneton attacks, spread damage, while also adding to the tankiness of all of these Steel type Pokemon just by attaching metal energy to them. This is a tough deck to face if you don't know how to play around all of these different Pokemon's powers and attacks. But that's what I love about this format and this deck in particular, is it gives spotlight to the Steelix and the Magneton that otherwise wouldn't see a whole lot of play. In order to get all of these different Pokemon set up, all of these turning, intertwining gears, we do have some pretty typical search and draw power, your full play set of Pokemon Fan Club, 3 copies of Professor Elm, 3 copies of Copycat, 3 copies of Master Ball. That's going to get you most of what you need the majority of the time. If you are using that much search and draw and still not getting your setup on turn 3 or 4, then the RNG of real life has just infected your deck. A full playset of Goldberry just to make all of these Steel type Pokemon even tankier. It's going to be even more useful whenever you're up against a fire deck, since pretty much everything in here is weak to fire. Double Gust just to synergize with those Discovery Fortresses and the Spike Pokemon power. Spikes is only relevant on your opponent's turn whenever they are moving Pokemon, so just hitting them with a Double Gust isn't going to stack damage, but by forcing an unfavorable Pokemon into the active position, it's going to make your opponent want to switch from the bench into the active, and they're going to take damage doing so. Though Magneton and Steelix can attack with the attacks you want to be using for colorless energy, having the metal energy is useful for making them tankier. If you do want to attack with a Fortress, it does require the metal energy, so you want to be able to recycle them. That's why we have a full playset of Power Charge to accompany the full playset of metal energy that this deck is going to be using. Because it's going to be running primarily off of just colorless energy, you can go heavy on the special energy cards that just provide colorless, like Recycle Energy. That way you're not having to recycle all forms of energy because this one's always going to come right back to your hand. So these are just energy that take care of themselves whenever the Pokemon it's attached to gets knocked out, or if you get hit with a super energy removal, it's just going to bounce back to your hand and you can replay it from there. Cyclone energy is another way that you're going to be able to force your opponent to hurt themselves. It's going to provide colorless energy, which is going to help you power up for an attack, but it's also going to force your opponent to gust out a Pokemon, and if it's not the Pokemon that they would ideally want in the active position, they're going to have to switch sooner or later or retreat, and they're going to take damage for doing so from Forretress's Spike Power. Couple copies of Warp Energy in here as well, just because the Pokemon in this deck have some high retreat cost, and paying that retreat cost is not a thing that you're gonna ever do. Also a couple copies of Boost Energy in this deck, mainly for Magneton because it has that triple colorless attack cost. You can just evolve up, attach a Boost Energy, and you're getting off a great attack on turn 2 potentially. And that type of spread damage that early in the game is gonna be very difficult to recover from. Before we continue, I think I should say a little more about that Strength Charm errata that I mentioned earlier. We'll start by looking at Steelix's Earth Rift attack. It deals 10 damage and also 10 damage to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. Pretty simple, right? The print on Strength Charm says whenever an attack from the Pokemon that Strength Charm is attached to does damage, the attack does 10 more damage. It does not say to the defending Pokemon. So if you use Earth Rift with a Strength Charm attached, just going purely by Strength Charm text, you're actually dealing 20 damage to everything, which is super powerful in Neo-On. But the Wizards of the Coast errata does include the words, to the defending Pokemon, so the added damage from Strength Charm is not going to apply to any damage done to the bench. Now to the exploration of further Jasmine options. Starting with the classic Gold, Silver, Crystal team where we have the Magnemite line and Steelix. If we're staying on theme and only going with the metal type Magnemites, then we still have the Discovery Magnemite, which is pretty good on its own, but its inclusion does necessitate the addition of Lightning Energy into the deck, which is very much possible since you can only have 4 special metals in the deck anyway, but then you have to detract away from what we were doing with the special metal energies and make more room for the lightning energies. The same could be said for Revelation Magneton, as it's a pretty good card, it just fits better in a deck that is more centric to lightning energy, or really just a magnet-centric deck, which I already have on the channel, so I will tag it up above right now. The Skyridge Magneton is also decent, but just not really living up to what I was trying to do with this theme build. An argument can really be made for the inclusion of Skyridge Steelix though, because any basic energy attached to it is gonna be metal energy. You're not gonna get the boost you would get from special metal, but you are able to get off these high energy attacks without really having to have special metal attached. So you can get off a squeeze or a metal tail off of just whatever energy you want to attach to it, as long as it's basic energy. The reason it wasn't in this theme build is because I was leaning more towards the Aquapolis Steelix for what it could do, but also because I was already going to include so many special energy cards that would not synergize with this Pokebody. We're not even going to talk about Shining Steelix, the absolute tub of garbage that it is. What else we got in the Jasmine pool? We got Skarmory, Forretress. Alright, we can work with that, let's go. Skarmory is a bit of an odd one for Neo-On because the focus had really shifted away from basic Pokemon and more towards Stage 1 and Stage 2 Pokemon, which is another theme that you'll notice across all of these decks. A lot of Stage 1 Pokemon with the basic Pokemon kind of relegated to the side in more supporting roles. In the case of Skarmory, I do get it. Having a Steel-type basic Pokemon that could utilize Special Metal Energy, if you made them too strong, it would have just dominated the format, and that just didn't fit with where the TCG was going during Neo-On. So let's talk about Skyridge Forretress instead. It's a cool card, but you don't get near as much value out of it as you do with the stacking ability of that Neo Discovery Forretress. Scatter Bomb is honestly just a little too risky since you do want to protect your own Pokemon in a very tanky deck. You don't want to be placing damage counters on your own when the whole point is to just last as long as possible. This fortress actually fits a little more with the Bugsy deck we did than it does for the Jasmine one. And that will conclude the Jasmine theme deck, leader of Olivine City Gym, and one of the cutest sprites in Pokemon. As always, let me know what you think of the build, let me know what additions or changes you would make. Social media links are down in the description. Stay tuned for some more theme decks as well as just vintage Pokemon content in general. Thank you so much for watching until the end. I'll see you next video.